The coffee machine at Ember and Salt made a sound like a dying engine every morning at 6, and Neva Callahan had learned to love it the way you learn to love anything that's been keeping you alive long enough. She was wiping down the espresso bar when she heard the door open. Didn't look up. The morning rush didn't start for another 20 minutes, and whoever came in before 7 usually wanted quiet and a black coffee, not conversation. She was good at giving people what they wanted without making them ask twice. "We're not open yet," she said, still not looking. "I know." The voice stopped her hand on the counter. She knew that voice the way you know a scar. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because of what it had cost her to stop hearing it. Connell Voss stood in the doorway of her coffee shop like he hadn't been gone for 3 years. Dark wool coat, jaw sharper than she remembered, eyes that still moved the way they always had, slow, deliberate, cataloging everything in a room before committing to a single direction. Those eyes landed on her face and didn't move. Neva. Just her name. That was all. Like the last 3 years were a comma, not a period. She set down the cloth and looked at him fully. Outside, Philadelphia rain hammered the glass in sheets. He was wet from it, water darkening the shoulders of his coat. He'd walked at least a few blocks in this weather without a car. Connell Voss, who owned 3 of them. "I'm not open," she said again, quieter this time. "I know that too." He stepped inside anyway. She didn't stop him. That was the thing about Connell. She'd never been able to stop him from anything, not even when she'd needed to. Neva had been 29 when she married him. A hospitalist at Jefferson, working 70-hour weeks, surviving on caffeine, and the particular satisfaction of knowing exactly what was wrong with a person and how to fix it. She'd been good at her job in a way that felt almost violent sometimes. Precise, efficient, relentless. Connell had been 34. He ran Voss Capital the way generals ran campaigns. Patiently, without mercy, and always 3 moves ahead of whoever thought they were competing with him. His family name moved in the same circles as Philadelphia's oldest money, which meant it moved in circles that built walls to keep people like Neva's family permanently outside. She'd known what she was walking into when she married him, or she'd thought she did. The first year was the kind of marriage that looks correct from the outside. Dinner parties, a townhouse in Rittenhouse Square that cost more than her parents' entire block in South Philly fuzzin'. A husband who came home most nights and who was never cruel, exactly. Never raised his voice. Never made her feel small with anything as obvious as contempt. He was just absent. Present in the room and somewhere else entirely. And after a while, Neva stopped trying to find the door to wherever that somewhere was. The second year, she found out she was pregnant on a Tuesday afternoon between patients. Stood in the hospital bathroom with the test in her hand for 4 minutes before she felt anything at all. Then she felt everything at once. She told Connell that evening. He'd looked at her with those smoke-gray eyes and said, "Good," in the same tone he used to confirm quarterly projections, like it was a variable that had resolved correctly. She should have known then. But she'd still loved him, which meant she was still finding reasons to explain away the distance between what she needed and what he gave her. Their daughter Rosalind came into the world on a February morning with her mother's dark hair and her father's terrible stillness. She was perfect and terrifying, and the only person Neva had ever loved without ambivalence. Connell looked at Rosalind the same way he looked at everything, like an interesting problem he hadn't solved yet. The night Neva left, Rosalind was 14 months old. She'd been on a 24-hour shift. Came home to the townhouse at 7 in the morning, still wearing scrubs, brain running on fumes, and the particular numb clarity that comes after you've kept someone alive through the night by sheer refusal to let them go. Connell was in his study. The door was half open. She'd walked past and heard a voice she didn't recognize, low, careful, the specific register of someone used to conversations that required care. She'd stopped, hadn't meant to listen, but some part of her had already known. She heard enough, not everything, but enough. Enough to understand that whatever her husband was building inside those walls, it wasn't just capital. Enough to understand that the men his family did business with operated by rules, that courts could never quite pin down, and that Connell had not only known this, but had made himself indispensable to it. When the door opened and Connell stepped into the hallway and found her standing there, his expression didn't change. That was the worst part. No guilt, no fear, no flash of anything that suggested he understood what she'd just heard or what it meant. "You're home early," he said. "Did you ever care?" The words came out before she could engineer them into something safer, about any of it. The marriage? Rosalind? Me, or were we just? She stopped, made herself finish. Just something that made the picture look right. Connell looked at her for a long time, the way he always looked at things he was deciding how to handle. "You matter to me," he said finally. "That's not what I asked." Another pause, longer. "I don't know how to give you what you're asking for." She understood then that this was the most honest thing he had ever said to her, and that it was not enough, and that it would never be enough, and that she had known this for at least a year without letting herself know it. "Then I'm leaving," she said. He didn't stop her. She packed what she could carry, bundled Rosalind into the car seat at 7:45 in the morning, hands shaking so hard she had trouble with the buckles, drove herself and her daughter to her mother's house in South Philly, and sat in her childhood kitchen for 2 hours before she was able to stop shaking. 3 years. She'd built Ember and Salt from a lease she could barely afford on a corner space in Fishtown that everyone told her was too far from foot traffic. She'd been right and they'd been wrong, and now the morning line sometimes snaked out the door, and Rosalind went to a good preschool 2 blocks away, and Neva slept in an apartment above the shop that smelled like coffee and her daughter's strawberry shampoo, and it was a life she had built entirely herself, which made it hers in a way the Rittenhouse townhouse never had been. The divorce had been quiet. Connell's lawyers had been efficient. She'd refused alimony on principle and taken only what she'd come in with. The custody arrangement gave Rosalind to Neva full-time, with Connell getting scheduled visits, most of which he rescheduled. He sent money for Rosalind that Neva put in an account she didn't touch. She was fine. She had learned to be fine with a thoroughness that left no room for anything else. And then Connell Voss walked into her coffee shop at 6 in the morning and said her name like no time had passed at all. She didn't offer him coffee. He didn't ask for it. He stood on the customer side of the bar and looked at her the way he used to when he thought she wasn't watching, like she was something he was trying to memorize in case he forgot. "You need to leave Philadelphia," he said. She laughed. "Couldn't help it." "Good morning to you too." "I'm serious. You're always serious. Why?" He was quiet for a moment in that particular way that meant he was deciding how much to tell her. She'd spent 2 years learning to read his silences and had never fully cracked them. "Because people who know who I am have figured out who you are," he said. "And what you mean. What I mean," she repeated. "I'm your ex-wife, Connell. I run a coffee shop. I have no idea what you do, and I want no part of it." "I know that. Then why are you here at 6 in the morning talking about?" "Because someone followed Rosalind's preschool van yesterday." The air went out of the room. Neva set both hands flat on the counter, steadied herself against the solid wood. "What?" "A car. 2 men inside. They stopped 2 blocks from the school and didn't go further, but they were there. My people confirmed it last night." "Your people." She heard how her voice sounded. Flat, careful, the way it got when she was working, and the situation was serious, and she needed her hands to be steady. "You have people watching my daughter's school. I've had people watching the school since she started attending. You didn't know because I didn't want you to have to think about it, Connell." "I know," he said it quietly. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like you've been surveilling my child's daily life without telling me for months. I've been keeping her safe without burdening you with why." A pause. "Those are different things." She stared at him. 3 years of carefully built distance, and here it was, cracking right down the middle on a rainy Tuesday morning. Why now? Why are they coming after us now? He looked away from her for the first time, jaw tight. "Because someone inside my organization talked to people they shouldn't have talked to. About me. About what I have. And about what would hurt me most." The words landed like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that someone is trying to get to you through us. Yes. And that you came here before calling me, before warning me through any normal channel, because Because I needed to see if you were safe first. His voice didn't change, but something beneath it did, tightened. And because phones can be monitored, and because there are things I need to tell you that I should have told you 3 years ago. She sent the part-time barista home before the girl arrived for her opening shift, locked the front door, made 2 coffees because her hands needed something to do, and standing behind the bar felt like the last piece of ground that was fully hers. Connell took his without asking about it, still black. Some things didn't change. "Tell me," she said. He told her. His father, whom she'd met exactly 4 times, and each time felt like being interviewed for a job she hadn't applied for, had built Voss Capital on the surface and something considerably darker underneath. Not organized crime in the way she'd imagined it when she'd first heard that voice in the hallway. Not gun running or drugs. Queeter than that, and in some ways worse. Money that moved between accounts and across borders and turned crimes into line items, made powerful people untouchable, bought the kind of silence that courts couldn't find because it didn't look like silence. It looked like investment. Connell had inherited the firm at 32 when his father had a stroke. He'd inherited everything, the legitimate and the not. He'd spent 2 years trying to understand the full scope of what he'd stepped into, and another year figuring out how to start dismantling it without getting himself killed or destroying the lives of the people who'd worked honest jobs at the firm for decades. He'd been careful, methodical, the way he was about everything. "You were married to me during this," Neva said. "Yes. You were trying to figure out how to extricate yourself from your father's criminal infrastructure, and you said nothing. I didn't want it near you. So instead, you just... What? Let me think you didn't care. Let me think I'd built a life with someone who was just going through the motions." Her voice came out sharper than she meant it to. She didn't smooth it over. "You let me leave thinking I'd been wrong about everything, Connell. You let me think our marriage was nothing." Something moved behind his eyes. "I know, that's not good enough. No," he said it simply. No defense, no pivot. "It wasn't. I made a choice to protect you by keeping distance between you and what I was dealing with, and I didn't consider that from where you were standing. The distance just looked like absence. That's my failure." Neva pressed both hands around her coffee cup and said nothing for a long moment. "Who's behind this?" she asked finally. "The men watching the school, a man named Garrett Finch. He was my father's closest partner before the stroke. He's been waiting to see which direction I'd move, toward burning the operation down or preserving it. He got his answer 3 months ago when I started cooperating with a federal task force. You're cooperating with federal authorities, carefully, with someone I trust." A pause. "There aren't many of those. And Finch found out. Someone told him. I don't know who yet. Which is why I don't know who inside my own circles I can trust, and why I came here myself instead of sending anyone." Neva stood up, walked to the window and looked out at the rain-soaked street. Fishtown in November, gray and wet, and entirely hers. Her daughter was asleep upstairs right now with her stuffed rabbit and her nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. 4 years old and approximately fearless in the way only 4-year-olds could be, still convinced that every problem had a solution you could reach if you were brave enough. "You need to take Rosalind somewhere safe," Connell said from behind her. "I'm not sending my daughter away. I'm not asking you to send her away. I'm saying both of you need to. Both of us." She turned. "You're asking me to disappear, temporarily, while you do what? While I finish what I started." She looked at him in the gray morning light. This man she had married. This stranger who had learned to be a stranger so efficiently she'd never fully understood that was what he was doing. "Why should I trust you?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was quiet. "Because Rosalind is mine too. And I would burn everything else down before I let someone use her to get to me." She didn't agree. Not right away. She called her mother first, didn't explain, just told her something had come up, and she needed Rosalind watched for the day, kept her voice the color of nothing, while her hands shook for the second time in 3 years. Then she called her best friend Elise, who was also her attorney, and told her in 5 sentences what Connell had said. Elise said 4 words. "What do you need?" That was why they were best friends. She met Connell in the apartment above the shop 2 hours later. He'd been making calls downstairs. She could hear him through the floor, voice low and clipped, the particular cadence of someone giving instructions to people who needed to understand them perfectly. He came up when she called him, stood in her kitchen, with Rosalind's drawings on the refrigerator and the half-eaten box of animal crackers on the counter, and looked like a man who understood exactly how far he'd traveled from anything resembling normal. "I want full information," Neva said, "not what you think I need to know. Everything. If I'm making decisions that affect my daughter, I'm making them with everything on the table. That's fair. And I want to know who on the task force you trust. Name, rank, contact information. Also fair." And she stopped, made herself say the last part. "And I want to know why you didn't tell me. Not the version where you were protecting me, the real version." He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Because telling you meant admitting what I'd stepped into," he said finally. "And I didn't know yet whether I was going to find a way out or whether this was just what I was now, who I was. And I didn't want you to see me before I knew. You didn't want to be that person in front of me. I didn't want to be that person, period. But I didn't know how to stop being him and keep you at the same time. So I chose keeping you at a distance until I knew which way it would go." A pause. "I made the wrong call. By the time I understood that, you were already gone, and I thought." He stopped. "What? I thought you were better off." Neva looked at him for a long time. "That was not your decision to make," she said quietly. "No, just that. It wasn't. She made her own conditions. She and Rosalind would go to her mother's house in Wildwood. Not disappear, not run, but remove themselves from Fishtown for 2 weeks, while Connell's contact at the task force moved on Finch. She would keep Elise informed. Connell would give her every piece of information he had, updated in real time through a channel Elise would establish that couldn't be traced. And he would not make any decisions about her safety, her location, or her daughter without consulting her first. "I'm not property to be protected," she said. "I'm a person with full information who can make her own risk assessments. Treat me that way or don't involve me at all." Something changed in his face. Not surprise, exactly. More like recognition, like she'd said something he'd already known was true and hadn't known how to let himself know. "Agreed," he said. "One more thing. Tell me, you said someone inside your organization talked." She held his gaze. "Who?" He was still for a moment. "I have 2 suspects. My chief financial officer, a man named Barrows, and my head of security, Dex Pruitt, who has worked for my family for 15 years. Which one do you think it is?" "Pruitt." He said it without hesitation. "Because Barrows is careful and scared, and people like that don't gamble. Pruitt is," he paused. "He's loyal to money more than to people. I missed it for 15 years because the money he was loyal to was mine. What happens to him when you find out for certain?" The question hung between them. She asked it the way she'd asked Connell things in the early days of their marriage, when she'd still been learning what kind of man he was, directly, without softening it, because she needed the real answer, and not the palatable one. "He gets handed to the task force," Connell said. "That's all I have left in me now. Handing people to the task force." She believed him. She wasn't sure if she was right to, but she believed him. Rosalind took the trip to Nana's house at the shore with the complete philosophical flexibility of a 4-year-old who was promised she could get a hermit crab. Neva sat in the back seat of her mother's Subaru with her daughter's warm weight against her side, listening to Rosalind explain at length and with great authority why hermit crabs were better than fish because they had houses on their backs. And that was smart, Mama. That was really smart. Neva pressed her lips against the top of her daughter's head and held her a little tighter than necessary. Her mother drove without asking questions. Patricia Callahan had been asking the right questions and not asking the wrong ones since Neva was 7 years old. This was simply another version of that skill. It was at her mother's kitchen table that night, after Rosalind was asleep in the back bedroom with her stuffed rabbit and a hermit crab named Gerald, who had been procured from a Wildwood boardwalk shop before it closed for the season, that Neva finally let herself feel how scared she was. Not the functional fear she'd been running on all day, The kind that sharpened her attention and kept her moving. The real kind. The kind that came from imagining Rosalind's face in a car that had been followed. From imagining what men like Garrett Finch did when they wanted leverage and had no conscience about what form it took. "You want to tell me?" her mother said. "No." Neva wrapped both hands around her tea. "But I think I need to." So she did, all of it. Patricia Callahan listened the way she always had, without interrupting, without the reflexive reassurances that were really about the listener's discomfort more than the speaker's pain. When Neva finished, her mother was quiet for a moment. "He came himself," her mother said. "What?" "In the rain at 6 in the morning. He came himself instead of sending someone." Patricia looked at her daughter. "That man has resources, from what you've described. He has people who could have delivered a message. He came himself, Alf. That doesn't excuse 3 years of... No, it doesn't excuse anything." Her mother's voice was careful. "I'm not saying it does. I'm saying you should notice it. The call came on day 4, Connell, the secure line Elise had established. His voice sounded like a man who had not slept, which was different from a man who was tired. It was the sound of someone running on something grimmer than exhaustion. Prout confirmed, he said. He admitted it, he ran, which is confirmation enough. A pause. The task force has him. He didn't get far. And Finch, that's more complicated. She heard him move, a chair, a window maybe. Finch has been building toward this for longer than I knew. Pruitt was only one piece of it. There's a second layer. A federal contact Finch has been paying for 2 years. Someone inside the task force I'm working with. The floor shifted under her feet. Connell, I know. You're cooperating with a task force that has a corrupt agent inside it. I'm cooperating with one specific agent who I know is clean because I've known her since she was a federal prosecutor, and I have reasons I trust her. But the broader task force has a leak, which means every move they've made for 2 months has potentially been visible to Finch, which means he knows you came to me. He likely already knew that before I came. He had eyes on your shop. She sat down on the edge of her childhood bed in her mother's house in Wildwood and pressed her free hand against her sternum. Breathed. What does that mean for us? It means I need you to stay in Wildwood for longer than 2 weeks. He said it the way he'd promised not to say things, as a statement instead of a question. Connell, I know. I'm asking, not telling. I'm asking you to stay put while I figure out who inside the task force is dirty and how to give that information to someone with enough authority to act on it without it getting buried. A pause. I can't do that if I'm worried about you being in Fishtown. She was quiet for a long moment. How long? I don't know. 2 more weeks. Maybe 3. My shop. I'll make sure it stays open and staffed. I know people who can manage it without it being obvious why. He stopped. If you'll let me. She noticed again that he was asking. She didn't say anything about it, but that she noticed. Fine, she said. 2 more weeks. And I want to call every day. Real information, not managed updates. Every day, he said. She called him on day 7, not waiting for his check-in. It was past midnight. She couldn't sleep. She'd been lying in her childhood bedroom, listening to the sound of the ocean 2 blocks away, and thinking about the conversation she kept almost having with herself, and kept interrupting before it could arrive anywhere uncomfortable. He picked up on the second ring. Are you safe? He said immediately. Yes. She stopped. I have a question, and I want you to answer it honestly. All right. Did you love me? Silence. The specific kind that meant he was still there, hadn't hung up, was choosing his words with the care he gave everything. She waited it out. Yes, he said. When? The whole time. A pause. That's not a comfortable thing to say after what I've just told you about myself. I know that. Then why did you make me feel like I wasn't? She stopped. The night I asked you if you cared. You said you didn't know how to give me what I was asking for, because what you were asking for was honesty, and I had been lying by omission for 2 years about something that could have put you in danger the moment you knew. I thought. He stopped, started again. I thought if you didn't know, you were protected. I thought if I kept you outside of it, you and Rosalind were safe. I didn't understand that in protecting you from one threat, I made you feel like you didn't matter. Those 2 things lived side by side in my head, and I never examined whether they contradicted each other. They did. I know that now. A pause. I knew it the night you left. I watched you walk out the door, and I understood in a way I hadn't let myself understand before that I had done the damage by trying to prevent it. Neva lay in the dark and listened to the ocean. You should have told me, she said. Yes, I would have stayed. Silence. I know, he said, and I was afraid of that too, afraid that you'd stay and that something would happen to you and that it would be my fault for letting you choose it. She understood then what she'd never quite been able to name during the marriage. He had loved her in the only way he'd learned, which was to hold the people who mattered at a distance where he could control what reached them. It was not a healthy way to love someone. It was not what she'd needed or deserved. But it was the shape of what he'd had, and he had given her all of it, which in some terrible way was true. We're not there anymore, she said. No, if we're going to get through this, and I mean get through this, all of it, the Finch situation, the task force, whatever comes after, I need you to be done keeping things from me on the grounds that it's for my benefit. Agreed. I mean it, Connell. I know you do. So do I. The break in the case came on day 11, and it did not come from the task force. It came from Rosalind, not directly. But Neva's 4-year-old had been spending her Wildwood mornings with Patricia Callahan, who had spent 35 years as a high school librarian and had a gift for coaxing information out of unwilling sources through the pure power of patient attention. What Patricia coaxed out of Rosalind on day 11 was a description of a man Rosalind had seen twice in the parking lot of her preschool, a man she'd mentioned once to her teacher and promptly forgotten because something more interesting had happened immediately after. The teacher had filed a note. The note had gone into a binder. Neva found it in the packet of papers she'd grabbed from school before leaving, which she'd finally organized at her mother's kitchen table that morning. She called Connell. She described the man, older, heavyset, a particular jacket Rosalind had liked because it was the same blue as Gerald the hermit crab. 3 seconds of silence. Then, that's Finch's driver. He was at the preschool twice before anyone was watching. He was running reconnaissance. Before Pruitt even knew Pruitt would need to move. His voice went very still. Neva, this was planned longer than I thought. How much longer? Long enough that, he stopped. Long enough that someone gave him information about Rosalind before Pruitt did. Which means Pruitt wasn't his first source. Who else inside your organization knew about Rosalind? A pause that lasted long enough to be an answer. My CFO Barrows was at the dinner where I brought you and Rosalind 2 years ago, he said slowly. The charity gala. I thought he was safe. You said he was careful and scared people don't gamble. Scared people don't gamble unless someone frightens them more than the thing they were already afraid of. He was already moving. She could hear it. Barrows had a daughter who died 4 years ago. Finch knew the family. I need to find out if he's been using that. You think Finch threatened him using grief. I think Finch found every weakness in my organization and made sure every one of those people understood that he was a more immediate threat than I was. A pause. I missed it. I was looking for betrayal shaped like ambition, and it was shaped like desperation. Neva sat at her mother's kitchen table with Gerald the hermit crab moving carefully across his tank on the counter and thought about the shape of desperation, the way it looked different from the inside than from the outside. Find out, she said, and then bring it to your contact at the task force. The one you trust. I'm already calling her. The next 4 days were the longest of her life. She functioned. She is a physician. Functioning under duress is a thing she has spent 15 years practicing until it stopped requiring practice and became simply who she was. She took Rosalind to the beach every afternoon and watched her daughter run at the water with complete conviction that the waves wouldn't catch her. She drank her mother's terrible decaf and helped with dinner and called Elise every morning at 8. Connell called every evening. Real information as promised. Day 12. Barrows confirmed. Finch had told him that if he didn't cooperate, information about his daughter's death. Information that suggested the circumstances weren't entirely what the official record showed would reach the press. A private tragedy weaponized. Barrows had been feeding Finch information for 8 months. He'd done it while hating every moment. Day 13. Connell's contact, a deputy director named Whitmore, who had jurisdiction over the corrupt agent, moved on the leak inside the task force. The agent was named, arrested, processed. Connell had the documentation to his attorney within 6 hours. Day 14, Finch made his move. Not the move any of them had expected. He didn't come after Neva. He went to the press. A reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer received an anonymous package containing documents suggesting that Connell Voss had been voluntarily cooperating with his father's criminal enterprise for years before claiming to be a whistleblower. That the cooperation with federal authorities was not the action of a man trying to do right, but of a man trying to cut a deal before the walls closed in. Neva found out when Elise called her at 7 in the morning. She called Connell immediately. He picked up on the first ring. "I know," he said. "Is it true? Any of it?" The pause was 1 second. "No. The documents are fabricated. Finch has had someone building them for months, probably since he realized I was cooperating." "Can you prove that?" "Whitmore can prove it. The task force has records of when I first made contact, what I provided, what I couldn't have provided if I'd been protecting the operation." A pause. "It'll take time. A week, maybe 2. In the meantime, the story is going to be bad. I know what bad press looks like, Connell. I'm asking whether the truth is what you've told me." Silence, different from his other silences. Not calculating, not careful. Raw. "Yes," he said. "Everything I've told you is true. I've made terrible choices. I kept you in the dark for years, and I let you walk away when I should have trusted you with the real situation. But I am not protecting a criminal operation. I'm trying to end one. That part is true." She stood at her mother's kitchen window looking at the backyard where Rosalind was not yet awake and the October light was coming in sideways and gray. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I believe you." She said it simply. "What do we do now?" He made a sound she hadn't heard from him before. Not quite relief. Something more complicated than relief. Something that had been held under pressure for a long time and was only now finding a small space to move. "Whitmore's team is making a statement today. They'll confirm my cooperation timeline. It won't kill the story immediately, but it'll undercut it. And Finch? There's a warrant. He knows it. He's going to try to run or to make a deal." A pause. "Either way, he's not making decisions from a position of power anymore. What about his people? The driver who was near Rosalind's school, being picked up today." She breathed, let herself breathe, really breathe, for the first time in 2 weeks. "Come to Wildwood," she said. Silence. "Neva, my mother's house. Come tonight." She paused. "Not because it's safe or strategic, because I want to see you. Because my daughter has been asking why Daddy hasn't visited, and I've been running out of non-answers. And because I have things I want to say to you, and I don't want to say them over a phone." A long pause. The kind she'd learned to read, not hesitation, but something that had been closed for a long time, opening slowly, not sure yet of the hinge. "I'll be there by 7, he said. He arrived at 6:45. Stood on her mother's porch, in a coat that was not quite dry from the drive, and Rosalind launched herself at him from the doorway before he'd even knocked, having watched from the window with the predatory patience of a child who has identified a target. Neva watched him catch her daughter, watched something unlock in his face, not soften exactly, but open, like a room that had been closed for years and finally had a window cracked. "Gerald is a hermit crab," Rosalind informed him at significant volume. "He has a house on his back. That's smart. That is smart," Connell said. He looked at Neva over her daughter's head. She looked back. Patricia Callahan appeared in the doorway, assessed the scene with 35 years of practiced accuracy, and said she was going to check on Gerald's water and would everyone please come inside before the cold came in with them. Rosalind fell asleep on the couch at 8:30 with her head on Connell's knee and her rabbit under one arm and Gerald's tank on the coffee table, where she could see it. He didn't move her. Just sat there with one hand resting on her back, light enough not to wake her, steady enough to feel like he meant it. Patricia said goodnight with the particular tact of a woman who had been giving her children space to figure things out for decades. Neva sat across from him in the quiet. "She looks like you," he said, not for the first time, "but she's fearless like. I don't know where she gets it." "Me," Neva said. "It just doesn't look like fearlessness from the inside." He looked at her, the smoke-gray eyes, still cataloging, still moving over everything with the attention of someone taking stock, but different from 3 years ago. Or she was seeing something different. Maybe both. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "You do. I don't know how to make it right. I'm aware that's not the same as not wanting to. I know." She looked at her daughter's sleeping face. "What happens after this? After Finch? After the task force? After whatever comes next? What does your life look like?" He was quiet for a moment. "Smaller. The firm will probably need to be restructured. Significant parts of it will likely be dissolved once the legal process runs its course. I'll cooperate fully with that. Whatever's left will be legitimate and smaller. And," he paused, "and not something I need to manage from behind 3 layers of distance. Could you live like that?" "I want to live like that," he said it simply. "Whether I know how to yet is a different question." Neva leaned her head back against the chair. The sound of the ocean was faint from here. Gerald moved in his tank. "I'm not promising you anything," she said. "I'm not asking you to, but I'm not." She stopped, let herself say the rest. "I'm not closed to the conversation. For the record." He looked at her steadily. Not with hope, exactly. With something more careful than hope. Something that had been through enough to know that careful was the only version worth trusting. "For the record," he said, "neither am I." Finch was arrested 11 days later outside a rented house in South Carolina where he'd been living for 9 days under a name that almost worked. The warrant was federal. His attorney released a statement. The Inquirer published a correction that took up a third of the page and buried the original story in the way only corrections can. Not by erasing it, but by making everything around it look sharper and more damning by comparison. Neva went back to Fishtown on a Thursday. The shop was intact. Elise had managed it with a quiet competence that made Neva feel briefly that she could probably retire and Elise would handle everything. The morning regulars asked where she'd been and she said family stuff, which was true in every direction. She called Connell that evening, not the secure line, her regular phone. "It's over," she said. "The immediate part. The legal process will take time. I know how legal processes work." "Right." A pause. "How's Gerald?" She laughed. "Couldn't help it. He's transitioned well. Rosalind has given him a second shell option in case he wants to upgrade. She feels strongly about having choices. She's 4. She's terrifying. I mean that as a compliment." A pause. Comfortable, somehow. The kind that didn't need filling. "I'd like to take her to the Please Touch Museum," he said. "On Saturday, if you're willing. And if you wanted to come, I'd like that too." Neva looked at her coffee shop through the window. Her windows, her espresso bar, her machine that groaned like a dying engine every morning at 6 and kept making coffee anyway. "Saturday works," she said. "They didn't fix everything on Saturday. You don't fix 3 years and a marriage built on, kept silence in an afternoon at a children's museum." And Neva was a physician and a realist, and she had no patience for the version of this story that skipped the hard parts. But Rosalind held both their hands on the way out because she'd decided that was how it should be done, and nobody argued with her. And Connell held on without being asked twice. And Neva thought, maybe this is what starting over actually looks like. Not a clean slate, not the erasure of everything that went wrong. Just 2 people who had both been broken by different kinds of fear, choosing to try again with their eyes open this time. Not safe, not simple, but hers, chosen, built from what remained after everything else had been stripped away. Which, she was learning, was the only foundation that ever held.